Time now for our international press reviews with Florence Villemino, and obviously coverage of a lot of the world's press dominated by events in South Carolina.
It's really the main story across the world, especially, as you can imagine, in the U.S. If you want all the latest details on that shooting, you can head to the Post and Courier. That's the local paper in South Carolina. Today they're talking about the shooting suspect, Dylan Roof, how he's actually returned to Charleston. You can see a city in mourning. Residents of Charleston are struggling to understand why the 21-year-old would sit down for an hour at this Bible study in this historic black church and then open fire, wiping out most of the clergy. Barack Obama said the shooting stirred up a dark part of American history. It's definitely a dark day in the U.S.
Obviously, various debates have been set off by this. It's been treated as a hate crime, of course, and some people have been talking about whether it should be labelled an act of terrorism and really looking at the way the media deploys that particular word, not always equally.
Absolutely. Very interesting debate in a lot of papers today. Let's take a look, first of all, at the Daily Beast, which says, let's call the shooting what it was, a terrorist attack on U.S. soil. It's really that simple. If you just look at the definition of domestic terrorism in a U.S. federal law, well, this shooting ticks all the boxes. And yet we're not hearing the media, we're not hearing law enforcement officials, and we're not hearing elected officials talking about it as a terrorist attack. Why is that? Well, for more answers, check out this article in the Washington Post. It's a very interesting piece by Anthea Butler. She's an associated professor of religion and Africana studies at the University of Pennsylvania. The title really says it all. Shooters of color are called terrorists and thugs. Why are white shooters called mentally ill? Because this is really the typical narrative that you see in the media to ascribe white male shooters. They're lone, disturbed, mentally ill men, failed by society. All these things humanize them. According to this article, it's a racist narrative that really proves the power of whiteness in America.
Many papers saying this shooting shatters any ideas of a post-racial America.
Absolutely. Now, that was something that a lot of people hoped for in the wake of Barack Obama's election. Now, this is the editorial in The Independent. It talks about the fact that a lot of people saw his election as saw that there was going to be a brighter future for race relations in the U.S., but the story today is very different. The Independent talks about a divided nation. You just have to look at recent events in Ferguson, Baltimore, the Black Lives Movement to see that there really is a problem. This is another very interesting article today, once again, in the Washington Post. It's about racism and millennials. Millennials are people born typically after 1980. Now, what this article says is that the shooting really shatters a myth about millennials, and that is that they are more tolerant than their parents. They're colorblind. Well, if you look at studies, it's a very different story. Millennials, particularly white millennials, are just as racist as their predecessors.
Focus also on these small but sometimes quite active white supremacist groups.
Absolutely. Slate says that this shooting is actually the most high-profile example of white extremist terrorism in the United States since the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. Slate actually has a very depressing list about, since in the last 20 years, total of 27 deadly attacks carried out by white supremacists. Now, police say it's unclear whether or not the shooting suspect in this case had actually joined any organized white supremacist groups, but he did harbor racist views. And he also, there's photos of him on Facebook that show a car with a Confederate flag on its license plate. And you can see this article once again in Slate that really looks at the symbol of the Confederate flag. The Confederate flag that actually flies over the South Carolina State House. Over the years, it's arguably become a symbol of racism. And the fact that it's still flying in South Carolina is proof of the very complicated racial tensions that still exist in the South and in the states in general.
And of course, gun control again.
Gun control, that debate very much in the press today. Let's start with a photo. First of all, once again, in Slate, really captures America's relationship with guns. This is actually the front page of the Charleston Post and Courier yesterday. You can see they're talking about that church attack. What you can see glued onto the front page is actually an advertisement for a local gun shop. $30 gets you everything. Lots of papers are saying this is really symbolic of America's very complicated relationship with guns.
Well, that's all we have time for. We'll take a very quick break.